how many years in a row did a team that won the national title for as long as I can remember win the national title from various parts of what conferences, including the SEC, Big Ten, Pac-12, it's been a while, and then also the Big 12 or ACC. How many of those teams in the last 10, 15 years, and I might miss one here, and I might be able to go back even deeper than that, ever had more than 1 or 2 losses?
I don't think anybody's ever had more than 2, ever. I mean, that, like, I could be wrong, but no, nobody's ever had more than 2. Now, that's a very realistic possibility this year.
Yeah, well, I mean, now we're starting to want teams that have 3 losses or more to get into the playoff, or at least they're not done. Don't forget about them. Eventually, you have to win games no matter what your schedule is. You also need to beat good people. And yes, some of the losses might be against other good people because of the way the conferences are aligned and the schedules are put together. But it's part of this is what you wanted as conferences. So I don't know. I am not totally against a 3-loss team making the college football standings, but I'm pretty damn I need to know. So I just keep hearing, well, yeah, but remember now, no, you have to win the games you play. You have to win the games you play. You didn't have a 9-3 team winning the national title that played in the Bowl BCS championship or semifinals. You have to, Craig, win games no matter what your schedule, how difficult it is compared to anybody else.
Yeah, you do. And so there's more games out there to be played. I get that everybody's all caught up. I guess we're seeing the effects of the downside of the playoff is that everybody's only talking about the playoff now and not the incredible weekend we just had or the games that we have in front of us. We're already talking about the playoff. So that's a part of this the last couple of weeks. It hasn't been probably my favorite thing because I'm more of a let it play itself out type of guy. And I understand that in the system that we're in, this is not going to be nice and clean and all that, but I'm enjoying the games. I'm enjoying the chaos that it's causing, and I'm not enjoying every single waking moment being spent on what-if playoff scenarios. We've got enough people doing that. We've got enough people pretending like the wins and losses don't matter or trying to do transitive properties and all of that. I saw what I saw on Saturday, games that actually happened and the games that have happened prior to that, so that's what I'm going off of, not on what might happen next week or what might happen the week after or who might whatever. Like, let's see the games play out. And, when we get to the end, like I could have sworn we had this whole conversation across the country last week about what if Army beats Notre. It wasn't even close. Mm-hmm. So, and I understand people have to fill airtime, including us, but like, I don't know. I just more of a straightforward type of guy. I didn't spend an hour of conversation last week about what if Army beats Notre Dame. Like, let's look at the scenarios where that could happen, but they didn't. They didn't even come close to doing that, so that was all completely pointless. So I understand there's going to be a lot of more what-ifs this week, but I'm glad for that reason it's a short week, so we don't have to dive as much deep into it, and we can just sit back here in a couple of days and let that also play itself out. So I get what you're saying, but like you're also playing right into it because we're starting off an incredible weekend with what about playoff talk. So it's working because all the talk's on that, but I also think it is, like I said a second ago, perhaps taken away from the actual games here towards the end.
It was a part of the college football weekend. About 8 teams, top 25 teams lost. Some of them, their first loss, like you mentioned, Army, no one thought Oklahoma would beat Alabama either. And they smoked Alabama 24-3. Now, let's get to the Big 12. Here are the 2-team tie scenarios. This is complicated. We are not going to spend 3 hours going through the different options, but here are some of them. 2 teams tied at 7-2. At 7-2 will be in the championship. All right? 3-team tie scenarios. A Colorado loss in Arizona State versus Iowa State. Arizona State lost its Iowa State, BYU. Iowa State loses Arizona State versus BYU. So you go on and on. There's BYU if they lose. If Texas Tech defeats West Virginia, then if Baylor beats Kansas and Cincinnati beats TCU, it's Colorado, Iowa State. Otherwise, Colorado versus Arizona State, yet again, there is West Virginia defeating Tech. Arizona State beats Iowa State. Then you have a 4-team tie scenario. Arizona State, Iowa State would be a part of that tiebreaker. It is very complicated. as you said, Craig, with what you mentioned, let's see how these games play out.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cluster, and that's a result of some really big results this weekend. The Colorado loss. Colorado had the bag and fumbled it. No other way to put it. Iowa State eked out a win and nearly ruined their chances to have an opportunity here at the end. Arizona State handled their business, even though it was a little wonky there at the end. So, yeah, it's a cluster here with 1 week to play, and 9 teams are technically involved or whatever it was. The number I saw last night, I think it was still 9 teams. I don't know if that's still the case or not, because it seems like every time I look up there's a here's the latest scenario, and even the Big 12 has delivered these instructions, but I don't think anybody's all that much clearer on really what to expect this weekend, because a lot of what you weren't expecting happened again this weekend. So it seems at the top to be pretty straightforward, but it wouldn't be surprising to see, other results go sideways this weekend and get even crazier. But, it's a log jam, and it's been a wild year for the Big 12, and that's not the best thing for postseason hopes, but it is great for just having a really interesting and deep conference race. So, yeah, there's a lot of teams still live, but you're feeling the best right now if you're Arizona State and Iowa State. Those are the two that are in control. And then BYU let some of that slip out of their hands this weekend with their second straight loss. So it's a crazy race. It's kind of what we expected, except for I think some of the participants are different than we anticipated, because we weren't thinking Arizona State would be in this position or BYU. But it's been a fun year, and it's all leading up to what should be a really fun weekend, starting with those games on Friday.
Sorry about that. I saw an Iowa State fan tweet this out. The worst possible scenario of who we should lean on to get Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game is Iowa State, because they played Oklahoma. It wasn't that long ago in the Big 12 championship game. Every fan base in the Big 12, Paul, even those who control their own destiny or not, are close to it. All of them have warts, and all of them have a little PTSD with their
everybody should be. It's going to be a nerve-wracking weekend. This last one was very nerve-wracking, with everything that's happened, and the losses, and the Big 12 wasn't going to make it easy. They weren't. And this is why we enjoy the conference, because you do not know what's going to, and that's the case across college football now. Parity reigns more than it ever has, but the Big 12 has been the preview for what's coming for a long time. They had balance the last few years. They've had it. They've had, top to bottom fluidity in the conference, which, it's depending on your perspective on things, is much more enjoyable than the same teams over and over and over again. We have no idea who's going to win the Big 12. We're to the last week. We have no idea who's going to play in the championship game, and that makes for a very exciting conference, even if you are one of the teams who's in the hunt right now and you're dying inside.
All right, the Big Ten knows at least Oregon is in, right? Mm-hmm. And the SEC knows that Georgia is in, right? Mm-hmm. Does the ACC know whether it's Miami, Clemson, or SMU?
I think SMU is in. I don't know. I might have to look.
All right. So and the Big 12 doesn't know exactly who will be a part of the teams that will play.
It's SMU's the only one that's guaranteed in. It's Miami and Clemson that are playing for the other spot.
So, 4 major conferences, everybody knows at least one team that's playing for the championship other than the Big 12, because there are so many options that can happen along the way. To talk about a couple of games before we get to this week's games, Kansas is red hot. They'll be in Waco this weekend. We'll hear from Dave Aranda a little bit later in the show about what they've done as they beat Colorado. As I mentioned, Iowa State, Arizona State, BYU. What a crazy ending, because of the field storming, and yet they still survived that. They are just playing really well. Which team right now in the Big 12 do you feel like is playing with the most confidence?
I don't think there's a single answer. I think it's multiple teams. I think it's Kansas, Baylor, Arizona State. I think all those teams are playing with a lot of confidence right now. I mean, look at the win streaks they're on. I think the best team might be Kansas, but I think, we'll see that for sure, because 2 of those teams meet this weekend when Baylor plays Kansas. So Baylor's won 5 in a row. Kansas has 3 straight top 25 wins. Should have been 4. Should have beat K-State. I know should have doesn't matter in the long run. Horseshoes, hand grenades, all that. But they absolutely should have won that game and fumbled it away. So they're not that far from 4 consecutive top 25 wins. So I err to them being the hottest team in the country because of who they're beating. But, there is Baylor, who's won 2 more games in a row without having suffered a loss. There's Arizona State ripping off wins and now putting themselves firmly in the championship game, barring disaster this weekend. So I think it's a combination. You could have had Colorado up until this weekend. At one point, BYU was in that conversation. Obviously, they've fallen off of that now. But, yeah, I think those 3 are right there in the combo, not just obviously as a conference, but nationally as the hottest teams in the country right now.
All right, here are the games this weekend, the TV times. Of course, 2 games on Friday, being Thanksgiving week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. College games even earlier than that. You have Oklahoma State at Colorado and a noon game on Friday. And then Utah, which gave Iowa State everything they could handle before they just couldn't get the field goal to go in after what was it, like a 45 or 50-yard field goal. UCF, 2 teams that are obviously very disappointed in the seasons. And then you have the game Baylor-Kansas, followed by West Virginia Tech. They're still in it. Arizona State, the rivalry game. TCU-Cincinnati, Kansas State in Farmageddon against Iowa State, a game that has great implications, in Houston playing in Provo against a 2-game losing streak in BYU.
Yeah, and Colorado, I look at Colorado last week. You beat Kansas, and then you've got, a team that is in an absolute nightmare scenario, right, in Oklahoma State this year next up. And so I don't think that was a trap game for Colorado. They knew. And Kansas, that wasn't any kind of like lucky bounce or anything. That was them straight taking it to Colorado, just like they did with Iowa State. They straight took it to them. Devin Neal was unbelievable in that game. But Oklahoma State, I mean, they emptied the clip against Tech and still did not win. So maybe that'll be the last trial. But also a team at the end of the year that has nothing to play for at all except beating you. That's kind of scary to me if I'm Colorado. And then, we've got some other intriguing games, but that one looks on the surface like it's not the most intriguing game in the Big 12 this week to me is Kansas and Baylor because of how hot they both are. But then again, you've got so much on the line for everybody else.
Colorado should have no problem with Oklahoma State. I was glad to see Oklahoma State, at least, Ollie Gordon had a really nice performance, and he's actually put together a pretty solid year, all things considered, just not many paying attention to it because it hasn't been on a stage of any sort that people are really watching here this season, as opposed to last year when he was in front of your TV screen. It felt like every single week is one of the best players in the country. So I'm happy that he's been tried and true with Oklahoma State along with the rest of his teammates. They've grinded through this season. But, yeah, that's going to be a mercy killing against Colorado because Colorado's pissed off. They know they have to win to have any chance. They're playing on Friday, so they can't sit back and know if they're in or they're out. They just have to go out and win. They're at home. So I'd expect Colorado to blow their doors off and then let Oklahoma State mercifully get into this offseason that's going to be plenty busy. UCF and Utah, neither team can go to a bowl game at this point. West Virginia and Texas Tech, both those teams are going to bowl games because congrats to Neil Brown. You're bowl eligible. And you would read the mentions of any West Virginia tweet and think that they were 0-11 entering the final week of the season. Fans are unhappy they're going bowling, guys. Mm-hmm. A lot of fans, not all of them, but a lot of West Virginia fans are unhappy that they're going bowling after their win this weekend. So thanks UCF for that. But yeah, Tech's got 8-4 possibility out there. That'd be a nice step forward for Joey McGuire, even though it hasn't been like a really electric year in terms of the big wins and those kinds of things, or even competing for the Big 12 in the big picture. They have put together a pretty nice year. Baylor, Kansas ought to be a heck of a game. Arizona State, obviously you're watching Arizona State there to see if they can win and hold on to their spot. Cincinnati needs a win over TCU to get bowl eligible, or they're going to have lost their last 5 games to go home early, which I've been warning about, and now here they are, and they've got 1 game to win, and they've got to beat TCU. Farmageddon's obviously going to be the big attraction this weekend, and then Houston, BYU, that could be a much bigger game depending on what happens right before it in Farmageddon, because if Iowa State were to lose, obviously that opens the door for BYU, who would then be playing arguably the worst team in the league at home in Provo to go to the Big 12 championship late on Saturday night. Or they could be kicking that ball off knowing that their great run, but these last 2 weeks cost them a spot in the Big 12 championship game. So they'll know by the time they boot the ball on Saturday night one way or the other. But, yeah, there's some interesting games. A couple that aren't as interesting because it's going to be the last hurrah for those teams. But it's been a fun year and has a lot of implications again this weekend to close it on out. So it's a fitting end for the Big 12 this year.
All right, so here's Brett McMurphy, who somebody on the chat said, well, you retweet about every one of his tweets. Well, maybe I do. I like it because it's not always just X's and O's. Kansas officially taking a blowtorch to the Big 12 becomes the first team in college football history with a losing record to beat 3 consecutive top 25 teams. They are creating havoc for those who thought and still have a chance, but they have been on quite the road. Dave Aranda earlier today saying that this will be Baylor's best opponent they've played this year.
I mean, they're playing better. Of the good teams they played, of BYU, Iowa State, they're playing better at the moment than any of the teams. Like even Colorado to come back in that game and win at a miracle against Baylor. So all those teams that they lost to, they're really good. In the Big 12, the one that's playing best at the moment when they played them, I kind of agree with that, is Kansas. They are absolutely red hot right now.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. I could definitely see that. You've won 3 straight top 25 games, so you are playing pretty good football because once, maybe lucky, twice, I don't know about that, 3 times in a row, it's definitely not luck you're dealing with. And the fact that it should have been 4 or could have been 4, you're definitely not dealing with luck at that point. So, yeah, I think they're a super tough team. Devin Neal had an incredible game on Saturday. I saw there's some Colorado fans that clearly are just like 11 years old or just old and immature that, we're trying to, this and that. And it's like, dude, Kansas just lined up and beat your ass.
Yep.
They put up so many yards on your proud defense, like just take the L, pal. So I saw not much of that. Colorado fans, I'm definitely not calling you out as a fan base. It's just your typical, every fan base has those people that just will not acknowledge anything other than they got screwed or it was the officials or it was this or it was that. Is like, how about your defense stop somebody? How about that? That would have come in handy on Saturday, and they couldn't do it, and I thought Dion was gracious in defeat.
I did too.
He just chalked it up to, they got their butts whooped, and they knew going in that it was in their control. Destiny was in their hands, and they let it slip out. Nobody else. And so that was really impressive because I thought Colorado was definitely on upset alert, especially on the road, but I just didn't think their defense would get pushed aside the way that they did.
522 yards.
Yeah, I mean, that's not something you can just see what happened. Well, it's like, no, dude, you gave up 500-plus yards. Like, come on now.
333 on the ground compared to 43.
Yeah, and Devin Neal, had nearly 300 all-purpose yards by himself and, 4 touchdowns. So he was amazing. And, Kansas went out and they earned it, and they're tough, and they're going to be really tough for Baylor, who's scorching hot right now in their own right. And, obviously there's the storyline with KUOC Jeff Grimes coming back to Baylor, where he was basically dismissed by Dave Aranda. They had some success together, but it wasn't good the last couple years. Got off to a rocky start in Lawrence. A lot of people questioning if he was the right hire, and good for him. I'm glad for him that here at the tail end, they're arguably one of the hottest offenses in the country as well. So they've really turned things around, and they've been the little master of mischief here over the last month that is in some ways providing a whole lot of entertainment, not only for Big 12 fans and college football fans, but is single-handedly sinking the Big 12's playoff hopes. So take what you want there. Some people will enjoy that. I know other people who root for the multi-bids and all that. Like Kansas pretty much burned all that down. So you may not be too happy with them, but you do have to give them credit.
Why the term blowtorch from Brett McMurphy made a heck of a lot of sense. So Oregon is in. SMU is in, Georgia is in, and the Big 12 doesn't know because they won't know until games start to be played and games and results and wins and losses come through in the end. By the way, congratulations to Oregon State for winning the Pac-2 with the field goal to beat Washington State.
Yeah, but the simplest is that Arizona State and Iowa State win.
Yeah.
So it's cut to the chase. Arizona State wins, they're in. Iowa State wins, they're in. Boom, there's your game in Arlington. Arizona State and Iowa State. Of course, if they don't, then a lot of other stuff could happen. BYU then steps up and maybe gets that spot. I know then you get into like the 4 others that have the micro chances of getting them. But yeah, the most clear cuts Iowa State and Arizona State. But yeah, congrats to Oregon State on winning the Pac-2 championship this year, I guess.
Here's the latest AP poll, and again, there's the coaches poll, and then tomorrow night will be another version of the college football standings, and God bless them for trying to sort all this out. There you have Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Penn State. Man, they had a tight one, right? Was it Minnesota?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you have Notre Dame, who hammered Army. Georgia, they sat back and kind of watched everybody. Tennessee benefited the most because of what happened with Alabama, Ole Miss, Miami, SMU. And I have a note about SMU in the top 10 in a minute. Indiana, that game was kind of competitive, and then Downs and Smith and a couple other guys for Ohio State, they're just among the best players in college football, took over the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Indiana dropped a little bit too much, in my opinion. I mean, they have the same exact resume as Penn State. I mean, the only difference is that Penn State lost a closer game to Ohio State.
At home?
Yeah, I mean, so.
At Penn State, yeah.
What's the resume is the same. Like, I don't care, how you split it. Now, Indiana's still fine at 10. They'll be in the playoff, but I think they got a little ding too much. And Notre Dame's, drilled Army and Navy. Catholics haven't had that much success against the military since the Crusades. So, really, good on Notre Dame. I mean, Notre Dame, if they lose to USC this week, that probably puts them in a bit of a bind, but I think that they're all right.
Since the other loss is Northern Illinois, who now is 6-5, that has to come into play.
Yeah.
Right now it doesn't, because they've protected themselves with what they've surrounded themselves with the wins.
Is losing to 6-5 teams bad?
Is
it bad?
Yeah.
Is it? I don't know. Ask Alabama. Is losing to 6-5 teams bad?
Well,
it's not bad for them.
Alabama's at 13. Craig Smoak, your Oklahoma Sooners, who nobody gave a chance. I'm sitting there, had just had my own surprise Nebraska's bowl eligible, but I look up and OU is 3-3, and the next thing you know, I see an interception, I see a pick 6 from the kid from Carthage, and they just dominated Alabama, who dropped in the poll to number 13.
Yeah, it's weird. I had to pinch myself because I was assured by so many people last week that this was just an automatic win, like all these other hypotheticals that people are throwing out there, particularly in that part of the country where why do we even play the games? I don't know, for reasons exactly like that, you morons. That's why we play the game. So, yeah, I didn't think there was any chance for Oklahoma to win that game, but that's the beauty of college football. That's the beauty of actually lining up and having to go and do it, as opposed to just saying that on paper I have a better recruiting class, I get a win here. You actually have to go and take it, and that's what Oklahoma did with just a relentless defense and just enough of a sprinkling of offense. But that defense has been good all year. That hasn't changed, and that's carried them throughout, and that's their calling card. The offense, Jackson Arnold has yet to break out into, full-on Super Saiyan mode like people want him to and expect him to at some point in his college career. But he made some plays with his feet in particular. There's still a long way to go on that side of the ball, but you can at least see kind of the vision ultimately, like of what they could maybe eventually do there if they, make some changes this offseason. But he was able to do just enough, and yeah, they were just fiery, and that crowd was electric, and that just, you could tell early in that game that when Alabama just didn't pull away or take off with it, that little seeds of doubt started getting planted, and then the crowd got a little bit more raucous, and then another play goes against you, and the next thing you know, it's just snowballing. Now, I will say, I know it's a big topic of conversation. The officiating is just god-awful in this sport. It really is, and it's not exclusive to any league. It's every single league. The officiating is god-awful, and so for all of these gobs of money that we talk about, we're like, oh, look at that TV deal. Oh, yeah, the TV deal. Like, it's weird that we root for that anyways. That's a different story, but, when we talk about all this money that's being spread around and how great it is and how you're better because you have more and all this. How about you hire some damn officials that know what they're doing, because that call against Alabama on Saturday night really, really flipped that game. And so,
well, no. Flipped it?
Not flip, but like I think it was a big moment in that game.
Yeah, but they were down 24-3. It
didn't flip it. That was the wrong word. But I think you understand what I'm trying to say.
You never know what that would have created. Yeah.
But it absolutely just took away all sorts of momentum from Alabama. I mean, you watched like the next 5 minutes of that game, and even the announce booth, which Fowler, like everybody's just like stunned. It's almost like that game like hit pause or something, because everybody's like, did that just really happen? Did they really just take that off with that penalty that upon replay doesn't even exist? And that wasn't the only play from SEC officials on Saturday night, or the only game where you had like a total head scratcher. But I thought that was a terrible call. So that's not taken away from my enjoyment of the win. That did take away from just my enjoyment of the weekend, was just seeing some calls here and there across the country. But that was an awesome win for Oklahoma. They desperately needed that to get bowl eligible, given where they were. Is a real testament to those players and those coaches, and I'm happy for Brent Venables, and let's see what they can do against LSU coming up to close the season out.
I did see some questions of why the flag came out so late, because it wasn't a penalty, at least from the officials' point of view. You cannot have an ineligible touch by an offensive player until somebody actually does touch the football. And when he did, there you go. This is from Babe Laufenberg. Crazy call. If they ruled illegal touch, which they announced, it would not be a penalty until the receiver actually touches the ball, who was the illegal receiver. That is why the flag was thrown late in the play, not because the officials saw that Alabama was about to or just scored a touchdown. So you can't call something illegal until it's touched by somebody who they ruled to be covered up, which was a dumb thing in the first place.
Which was not at all what happened, and that's why it was, you can say illegal touch and all that, but the fact was, there wasn't that to call in the first place.
Yeah.
It's out of thin air.
Yeah.
It's a call out of thin air in a major moment in a game, and I saw that more than once in SEC games alone on Saturday. Mm-hmm. So if it wasn't for the fact I've seen bad officiating across the country, I think there was something up in that league in particular. I do think they probably have the most high profile. Mm-hmm. But, that was – I don't know. Just in this day and age, you just side-eye things a little bit more than you used to, especially when right after, like, you get slapped in the face with a DraftKings commercial. It's like, all right, it's just kind of weird.
Here are the big bangers. There are two games. This doesn't even include, by the way, Michigan-Ohio State, because it's not a banger. Two teams, both ranked inside the top 25, a rivalry there in South Carolina. The Gamecocks, who aren't quite out of anything with what they're doing, 8-3 playing Clemson, who's put themselves right back in a position to possibly play for the ACC championship. And then, of course, the renewal of the rivalry. Used to be Thanksgiving night, always was a great game. Texas dominates the series. Last time they played, last-second field goal to win it in Kyle Field. That's where they're going to play Saturday night ABC at 6:30.
And A&M is coming off a thrilling game where they let Peyton Thorne, Heisman Trophy frontrunner, quarterback who's not at all inspired 7 different wide receivers to transfer away from him, look like Aaron gosh darn Rodgers.
I thought he looked like Cam Newton.
I mean, it was ridiculous. Golly, A&M just finds ways to do these things when they're in the big spots. And look, they can still make the playoff. They can still make the SEC championship game. But my God, guys, have some respect for yourself. Auburn's not good. Go beat them.
And especially with all that happened in front of them, they could have moved up 5 or 6 spots if they would have just won the game.
Yeah, that was a very A&M move for sure. Did not see that coming, but I guess credit to Auburn. That was a wild game. A&M sure loves their overtime games.
God,
they love their overtime games. But that was wild, and just felt very A&M like to lose with all this momentum rolling in. And then again, maybe it's, I don't know. I'm sure somebody somewhere in College Station spinning is a good thing, right? To get them refocused ahead of this big game against Texas. I don't know. I think that it wouldn't matter if they were 0-11. They're going to be geared up for that one. But that was a terrible loss. And I think this is going to be a really special few days and a really special setting coming up this weekend to see those two teams, regardless of what A&M just did, lining up against one another for the first time in a long time. So I'm glad that the annual Thanksgiving tradition of having to hear writers from both sides talk about the good old days when the Aggies and Long, like, I'm glad we don't have to hear about like how great that was. We can talk about how good it actually is once again. And so that's awesome. Although, yeah, A&M kind of poisoned the water a little bit just in terms of not rolling in at their hottest when they could have just been on this real big collision course. But it's still going to be a collision. It's going to be awesome. And then South Carolina, Clemson's a big damn deal too. I mean, I know Clemson, has had its question marks, but they've had a really solid year. Cade Klubnik's been very good for them. And now South Carolina, as you pointed out, is I did see there's a guy, and I think he's a reporter, but it was like if Family Guy made like your South Carolina character, like if they made like prototype, it's like Hail Bartholomew, sweater wrapped around his neck type SEC Southerner. And it was a tweet of like, I don't like hypotheticals, but hypothetically speaking, if the SEC played the schedule of the Big 12, and it was just hilarious because he got roasted because he doesn't believe in hypotheticals, but then went directly into SEC hypotheticals about how they would beat, South Carolina would go undefeated in the ACC and this and that. And that's why at the beginning of the show, like, I'm just so sick of hypotheticals. I am so very sick of hypotheticals and who would beat who in the minds of Hell Bartholomew or any other completely non-biased fan, mind you. But yeah, he was one of the South Carolina fans that I saw that was really pumping up the playoff angle. So you know what? It's not entirely out of the question. And if they go beat Clemson this weekend and some other chaos happens, then you can see it. Lenore Sellers is a tremendous talent, man. So
their 3 losses are to 16, 12, and 7 when they.
So they have a case.
Yeah, they would have a win over Alabama. No, they lost to Alabama.
A&M.
They had a win over
Missouri.
Missouri. Well,
and
Missouri.
Then Clemson.
And Clemson, so.
Yeah.
Is Missouri still in the top 10? Are they still in the top 10? No.
If they aren't, then they were replaced by somebody else in their conference.
No coincidence that like half the AP all went to Missouri. Yeah. But anyways, so I think that South Carolina angle it was silly when I saw that hypothetical for a guy who didn't want hypotheticals, but just on their resume, yeah, there's a case to be made. I don't know about 3 losses getting you in, but certain chaos happens. That's the way it's set up for everybody. Ole Miss thought they were out, and then they're back in again, and so who the heck knows out of this weekend. But, yeah, South Carolina Clemson ought to be a hell of a game for that reason.
Garrett, let's wrap this up and then get to Ari Temkin. Can you get me the one about SMU last time they were ranked in the top 10? I know you got certain orders. This cracked me up. The last time SMU was in the top 10 in the AP poll, Ronald Reagan was the president. Number 1 song was Miami Vice's theme. Dozen eggs were 83 cents. Gas was 85 cents. Resale value for an A&M purchased gold 1979 Pontiac Trans Am, priceless. The story, of course, that A&M bought the Trans Am to get Eric Dickerson, who got the Trans Am and ended up at SMU.
Look, I'm a big fan of Miami Vice, and the theme song was cool, but was it cool enough to be like play it all the time? I mean, I was really young back then.
The music in the 80s was kind of.
I know, but I just couldn't imagine calling up the radio station like people did back then, and the most requested song being like, "Hey, gotta hear that Miami Vice theme," and then it's like, "All right, this is Wolfman Dan here on the Burn. You're going to hear that Miami Vice theme. Hey, push up your jackets. Get a paisley suit." I just can't imagine that. So